Good morning. Lovely day. Begin just with a little bit of quiet sitting. There are various functions for sitting quietly. One, of course, is to allow ourselves to become a bit more calm, to settle into ourselves. Of course, as soon as we try to do this, we find that we're not all that calm, that there's a lot of movement occurring. So practice by taking a simple focus of attention, like the breath going in and out of the nostrils, or some simple object of perception in front of you, maybe a mark on the floor or a pattern on the back of the person in front of you, and allow your attention to settle on that. And whenever you find your attention moving away, you gently bring it back. The mind will always be moving, so it's very natural that distraction will occur. We only call it distraction because we've decided to focus our attention. If we weren't making that decision, it wouldn't be distraction. Attention and distraction, these are both concepts we have in our own mind. So it's really important not to take these things too seriously. That meditation is a way of very gently exploring what it is to be yourself. It's a way of spending time with yourself in a way that allows you to be revealed to yourself. How you actually are, how you actually function. And we may find that how we are is rather different from the stories that we have about ourselves. And that's really the function of the practice. So we just sit for a while, quietly observing what's going on. Okay. So the general topic that we have is about the flow of transmission and the transmission of flow. And these are two important concepts in Tibetan Buddhism. And I'll be opening up these topics in relation to our own lived experience, so that hopefully you get a sense of what this really means. Transmission means a kind of connection from one thing to another. This implies that there is a connection between these two. So in a car you have a transmission that is linking functions in order to enable the car to move. If something is not transmitted, then there's a gap. The post office is supposed to transmit letters on a regular basis, and if we don't receive letters we're waiting for, then we feel a kind of interruption to the flow of our existence. We need things to be transmitted in the proper way, and consumerist capitalism is very much about transmission. Shops need to get their supplies on time. Communication is a vital part of transmission. So what is being transmitted, and who is it being transmitted by, and who is it being transmitted to? We've all had the experience of going to school, some kind of school, and in the school the teacher transmits a body of information, and so we get that information, and whether we've got the information or not is demonstrated by examinations. So people then ask us to repeat the things that we've learned. This is the transmission or the passing on of information, so that we become informed, we become formed internally in terms of this body of knowledge, of ideas, facts, and use that as a basis for moving out into the world. And the fact that we share information allows us to operate with each other on the basis of assumptions. We can assume that people know a bit about cooking, a bit about how to go about their daily life, that we know what taxes are, and so on. And so if you're having a conversation with someone, you assume that their knowledge of the English language will bring with it a certain body of information. So we connect with others on the basis of that transmission. And if you don't have that transmission, then there's a kind of gap. So now in multicultural Britain there's a whole question about how will different communities relate to each other. Should we know more about each other, or should communities maintain their kind of isolation in order to maintain the integrity of their own cultural transmission? Because the more you open to other people and you take in what they have, that new informing is likely to be a deforming of the system you were operating in before. It's one of the problems of integration. In the Buddhist context, what is being transmitted is not merely a cognitive knowledge, a kind of body of facts so that we become knowledgeable about something, but what is being transmitted is the possibility of a different way of being, so that we find ourselves more at ease. So the one who is doing the transmitting should do that from a state of ease. The transmission itself should be as easy as possible. And the reception of it should also be with ease. So how do we become easy in order to receive? most of us have the experience of being anxious about situations. We're frightened of getting things wrong. We're frightened of being told off, of making mistakes. These are qualities which don't promote ease. What could we get wrong in the transmission of the possibility of recognizing who we are? We could not recognize who we are. Well, from a Buddhist point of view, already we don't recognize who we are. So it wouldn't be a new mistake, it would just be an old mistake. So in that sense, there's nothing too much to be worried about. The central question is ease. Ease, relaxation, trust, non-effort, non-striving. These are not common words in our vocabulary, I think. Most of the time we want to show diligence. We need to turn our mind to the task in hand. We need to get on with it. There's always so much to do. And by focusing our attention on tasks, we solve problems. We go from there being a problem through the process of the problem solving to the resolution where there's no longer a problem. And then we relax. So relaxation is something that you earn as the result or the payoff from having been active and focused. It's a kind of reward or a prize. And of course it can vanish easily because a new problem arises and then we don't feel at ease. We feel we have to get on with something in order to solve it. So our sense of ease is always vulnerable to the arisal of problems. So we have a notion of dis-ease, that our bodies can become diseased. We even have a notion of mental diseases, and then we have to struggle to get back to ease. That duality, the polarity or the dialectic between ease and dis-ease, is one which reverberates through our lives. And it gives us the sense that our ease is not really built on anything solid. It's grounded on sand. The foundations can always crumble and fall away, and we find ourselves in dis-ease. We are alienated from ourselves. Something has gone a bit wrong. We're not quite in our own skin. So the central question is, if we want to have a transmission of ease, what is it that gets in the way of that ease? How is it that we are not easy with ourselves? What is it that we resist being easy with? The faults and mistakes that we've made, the tendencies that we have that we are intolerant towards, the ways in which we think we should be better than we are. These are very wonderful as the basis for striving. Not letting yourself off the hook, realizing that you could be a kinder person, a more generous person, a more thoughtful person. These are helpful remembrances for pulling yourself into shape and turning your mind towards a way of progression. But they are also very powerfully ways of not being at ease. Something must be done. What is it that must be done? Well, there are so many things that have to be done. Why? Because they're there, because they have to be done. What would happen if we didn't do them? Well, life would be terrible. This is the world in which we live. And when we buy into that set of relationships, these representations or this narrative, we are busy all the time. There is always something to be done. Every evening on the news, there will be some new disaster, some new change in the world political situation, the economic situation, and there will be something to be concerned about. Therefore, our ease will always be displaced because there are important things that as responsible citizens, as adults, members of the community, we should be concerned about. And this concern takes us into dis-ease. We're not at rest. This is roughly, I think, the basis of how our world is operating. In Buddhist language, we would say we don't get what we want, and we get things that we don't want. So our longings for something get interrupted or thwarted. And the moments when we start to be able to relax and to trust that things will be okay, something happens which knocks us off kilter, which interrupts the simplicity of our situation. The weather's nice, sun's shining, you go in the garden, and suddenly the neighbor's kids are out there yelling and shouting. You think, just fuck off, leave me alone. But there they are, they're enjoying themselves, but their enjoyment is an intrusion into your peace. These sort of things very often happen. Because the thing about when we relax is that we expand. Usually we're holding ourselves quite tightly together. You relax, so you have this sense of expansion. But of course, as soon as you expand, sooner or later you bang into something else. Because the world is not yours. We're not the omnipotent rulers of all we survey. We find ourselves interacting with other situations. So, could there be an ease which is not disturbed, which is not vulnerable to dis-ease? This is the central proposition of Buddhism. That the Buddha, historical Buddha Shakyamuni, and all the various representations of enlightened forms that you can see in this room, all show the possibility of an ease which is beyond disturbance. Now clearly, if you look at some of these paintings of wrathful Buddhas, they don't look at ease. They're standing up, they're dancing, they're moving, they have flames all around them. They're roaring with anger and rage. And yet, we say they are enlightened forms. What kind of enlightenment could it be that is so disturbed? Well, are they really disturbed? What is the nature of that energy? This is something we'll come back to look at. The possibility that every kind of experience we have, including anxiety, depression, confusion, rage, jealousy, frustration, all of these can be recognized as the energy of enlightenment. That it's not that we have to clean everything out and become better people before we can be fully at ease, but that radical ease is established and discovered in the midst of the confusion. It's not anywhere else. Because as long as you set ease and dis-ease back to back, as long as they are oppositional categories, they are going to be tied together and each impinging and moving the other. The only resolution is to recognize the non-duality or the natural integration of a state of openness, ease, and relaxation, and the ceaseless flow of movement. The mind is always alive. Thoughts, feelings, and sensations, this is our existence, this is our experience. It never ends. There will never be a time when everything is smoothed out and flat. Change, diversity, interaction, contradiction, conflict, and confusion is part of the mandala of all the Buddhas. If we exclude it and put it outside, if we say, when all the turbulence has ended, then I will find peace, you will never find peace. It will be like the Messiah, the yet to come. It will always be over the hill, horizontal. So there's something then about, if what I'm suggesting just now is true, it means that a lot of how we conceptualize our existence is not very helpful. That we're working to clear the problems away, and we're not interested in the problems. We don't offer true heartfelt hospitality to our problems. We experience them as an interruption, an obstacle, something that gets in the way of the ease and peace and calm that we seek. When this is finished, then I'll get on with my life. This period is a sort of interruption. It's an interval between the last time I was really happy, which was probably quite a long time ago, and the future period when I'll be really, really happy, which never quite seems to arrive. Maybe there's something wrong with this. Maybe it's that we don't know how to welcome our existence. We don't know how to really open up to everything that arises for us and swallow it with a big mouth, take the whole thing in, and live with existence as it reveals itself. So the transmission is about how to reorganize the basis from which we enter into relationship with our field of experience. So that instead of organizing whatever is occurring in terms of our familiar categories of good, bad, I like, I don't like, what I want, what I don't want, we accept whatever there is and find the real nature of whatever it is that's occurring. That is to say, my feelings about things don't tell me about the things themselves. And my feelings about things don't even tell me about me. For example, very simple example, if I say, I like tea, I prefer tea to coffee, what does that tell me about me? I like tea. You can't really take that much further. I like tea. I am, therefore, somebody who likes tea. It doesn't go anywhere. It's a sort of dead end. It's a little encapsulated thing. So, I like the color blue. I like to be by the sea. All of us can make these statements about ourselves, which encapsulate particular tilts or attitudes or positions in ourselves. The influence where we might go on our holiday, the influence what we might purchase in the shops. And they seem to be final and defining statements a bit about ourselves. About ourselves, as if there is a self, and these statements are telling us something about ourselves. But maybe these statements create ourselves. They create the storyline that I am somebody who can know who I am in terms of what I like and what I don't like, in terms of the various kind of feeling tones which I can have or not have. Inside that, the process of these arising thoughts and feelings is ceaseless. So we find ourselves, as the years go by, caught up in these stories about ourselves, making the choices that we make, and finding ourselves rather restricted. Because having decided I like tea and not coffee, looking back over the years, all the many cups of coffee I never drank. Liking to go to the sea, all the mountains I've never visited. So the definite knowledge about myself, the particular way in which I know myself, and gives me a certain contentment and reassurance, also diminishes the possibilities of my existence. Self-knowledge on that level is a kind of poison. It's a false security. It's a kind of intoxication or dream. Because how come other people like things that I don't like? Well, that's because I'm me. They're them, good luck to them. But I don't want what they want. Let them get on with it. But if we are human beings, how come we can't enjoy what they enjoy? Well, I'm not concerned about being a human being. When I go shopping, I'm concerned about me and what I like. But these other people who are going shopping, they are also human beings. So they're making choices, they are putting food in their mouth, and you're saying, I don't want to eat that. So what would happen to you if you were to eat their food? Would you die? Would you be poisoned? You would now become somebody who eats the food that you don't eat. So your knowledge of yourself, or the sealing, the encapsulation of your identity would start to open and crumble. The more you transgress the boundaries of the definitions of yourself, the more you find that actually all the things that people do, you can do. And this is one of the reasons why in Tibetan Buddhism you have these various kinds of Buddhas. They're to say all modes of existence, whether they're concerned with stupidity, with desire, with aggression, with jealousy, all the various forms of experience are not different from your real potential, from your Buddha nature. It's not that you have to remove the qualities that you think are unacceptable. It's that we have to perhaps recognize what is the nature of our experience. That recognition means something quite direct rather than something representational. By representational, I mean being built up according to the storylines of the cultural narratives that we all live in. Instead of telling ourselves stories about ourselves, we can, through the practice of meditation, start to directly observe ourselves and see the ways in which we create the sense of who we are. Now, the transmission of these ideas comes from the Buddhas. And in this particular tradition, the Dzogchen tradition, the Nyingmapa school, the sense is that the Buddhas are eternal. They have never come into existence, never come into finite existence. And we ourselves have the same nature as the Buddha. We ourselves are infinite. We show these momentary finite forms, the forms that we have in this particular life. But our actual form, our real form, is beyond any conceptualization. So the transmission begins with a Buddha called Samantabhadra. Samantabhadra means always good, or always perfect, always already open. Means in this state of being, in this state of awareness, there is no closure whatsoever. There is no self-sealing, no definition, no summing up. Can we imagine what that would be like? To be present, to be alive, without tying ourselves up, without nailing ourselves, without thinking, I'm too fat, I need to lose weight, I need to take more exercise, I need to get more sleep, whatever it would be, I need to do the garden. All of these thoughts which arise and put us into prisons which we accept because we identify as being the addressee of the internal messages in our head and of our external communications. We take seriously the importance of what we say to ourselves and what other people say to us. This doesn't mean that you should just discount or discard whatever is said. It means to be aware of who is the one who is being spoken to. The Buddha Samantabhadra exists in a state of openness. And from this openness, there was a direct communication to another Buddha called Vajrasattva. And from Vajrasattva, the communication passed on through many different people, and there are many different lineages, through Garab Dorji and so on. You can read about the details of that in descriptions of the lineage. I won't go into the particular details of all the people because it takes a very long time. The key point is that the origin, Samantabhadra, is always already present. It's not that this happened a long time ago. It did happen a long time ago, but it also happens moment by moment. The transmission comes directly from the origin, second by second as we live, and it's also part of a huge historical movement in which, on the relative level, on the level of us being human beings, if we don't meet people who are part of this, it's very unlikely that we're going to find it. All of us, I would imagine, have had moments of some kind of real opening and awakening. Maybe walking in the mountains, in nature, maybe through exciting activity where you feel suddenly very alive, maybe at a concert. Suddenly, you're just part of whatever's going on. You're no longer living in the bubble of yourself. These are wonderful moments, and they're often intriguing to us. They often set us off on a journey of discovery where we want to find out more about that. But we don't really know what to do with them. We don't have a path. The whole purpose of transmission from person to person, according to the lineage, is to enter into a vehicle or a method through which one can find a way to support oneself in being who one is. The original Buddha, Samantabhadra, is just open. He's essentially neither male nor female. He's a color which is on the edge of invisible. He's like an infinite, unformed possibility. Each of us is an infinite, unformed possibility. When we meditate, when we stay present with our existence, we find many thoughts and feelings arising. Each of these we could identify with, and that would become us for a moment, then for a moment, then for a moment. When we start to see that, we see, oh, this is how my existence is. It's created out of identifications. As I identify with these thoughts, and of course that involves selection between the ones I choose to identify with and the ones I don't identify with, I am coming into existence. That is to say, my existence is created out of investment and attachment. And in that state, I am revealed to myself as the one who I think I am. So having built up a degree of identity, I now start to do more things that reinforce that identity. For example, when you're 5 years of age and you first go to school, you don't know very much and you have a lot of energy and potential and enthusiasm, and you start to learn many different things. And that process hopefully continues all through primary school. Then you go into secondary school and it starts to shift a bit, because now you're moving towards more formal exams and you have to start making decisions. What GCSE are you going to do? Then maybe what A-levels are you going to do? And as you do that, your world starts to become more defined. And then if you go further with higher education and you go to university, you study a particular subject. And if that has a professional tilt to it, it may well determine the trajectory of the rest of your working life. You will find yourself doing more of that. And so, as you take up a particular position, you develop with it a selective attention which privileges, which gives more value to the things that relate to your particular area. And you become more and more expert in that one rather narrow area. And if you think back to all the other things you were interested in, maybe when you were 10, you think, oh, I haven't done that for a long time, because I've been doing this. And I've done so much of this that I really know about it, and so I can feel a kind of ease or comfort, a way of flowing inside this rather limited channel of experience. that is exactly what happens in the development of our mind. The more we identify with particular patterns, the more we invest these patterns with meaning so that they seem immediately rather shiny when we encounter them, and we divest or we don't invest into all the other things, and therefore they're not so shiny and we push them away. And this selective movement of this is me, this is not me, is, from the Buddhist point of view, the basis of the limitations and confusions of what is called samsara, or cyclical existence, the way in which our life goes into repetitive cycles in this life, where we continue the same kind of patterns, sometimes useful, sometimes not useful, but rather narrow, rather entrained into particular directions. And at death, we again move off and take birth in patterns which are rather determined by the tendencies that we have been cultivating in this life. So the more you become yourself, the greater the aspects of your potential that you ignore. That's why the psychological goal of self-actualization can often be a cul-de-sac, a red herring, because to really live in the authenticity of your being means to be at home in the absolute rejection of all the other things that you are not. I know who I am because I'm not any of these things. I am fully myself. But to be fully oneself is to be almost empty, because there are all these other things which one is part of. This is the problem with the modernist project of an individualistic, autonomous self, that in ring-fencing me, I, me, myself, my right to be who I am, I miss out on all the other things that I could be. And what would my experience be if I was these other things? This will become clearer as we go into looking at the structure of the mind and the differences between consciousness and awareness. In a moment, we're just getting some flavor of the general issue of selectivity. So, Buddha Samantabhadra, which is our own nature, is always open like the sky. The sky has no limit. It has no national boundaries or borders in it. There's no customs and excise in the sky. It's just an infinite expansion. Inside this, all things are possible. Because if something is very open and it doesn't have a solid structure to it, anything is workable. So here we have a Buddhist center. So in this Buddhist center there is a shrine, and on the shrine there are photos, and the photos have glass on them, and there are paintings on the wall. So clearly this is a place in which you have to take care. Nice people only. No teenagers with cans of paint. We do not welcome graffiti. No, that's obvious, isn't it? If some kids did a bit of glue tonight and broke in one of the windows and sprayed the place, in the morning people wouldn't be saying, "Oh, what beautiful rainbow colours, this is gorgeous." They'd be very, very upset and angry. Something has been destroyed. Don't they know how precious these things are? No, they don't. And they don't care either. We know they're precious because we make them precious, because we put our life energy, our capacity for meaning and value into these objects. To other people, they're just a bit of old tat. That's the truth of it, isn't it? That's the truth of it. When the communist soldiers were coming from China into Tibet, They just thought this is rubbish. And in fact, this is an insult to the workers. This is an insult to the people. So happily, they tore down statues. And when the Pakistani army invaded Ladakh and went into Zanskar, they were happily shooting up the monasteries. You can see the statues of the Buddhas with bullet holes in them. Because for the Muslims, it's all rubbish. When the Taliban in Afghanistan blew up the statues in Bamiyan, they were very happy. They thought, this is rubbish. Buddhist people didn't think it was rubbish. They thought it was an outrage. But the Taliban would still say it's rubbish. Everything is relative. No matter how strongly you believe in something, it is your belief. Our own mind makes things shine, and our own mind, as we pull back that shine, makes things not shine. That's the whole nature of romantic love. Without that, we'd have no Mills and Boon. You know? Where would Jane Eyre be? Hopes and fears, isn't it? It's all about investment, divestment, collapse, reinvestment. These eternal fluctuations of making things shiny, making them dull, making them shiny, making them dull. And this generates pain because we want a shiny world, so that in our substantiality, in the fixity of our shape, of having become someone, the world then whacks us. And we say, ouch. We say, I don't want this to happen. The world should be different. Why do bad things happen to me? Something is being hit. Ouch, it's me. I am being hit. This is the most central question. Who am I? What is the nature of the subject? And this is largely what we'll be looking at today and tomorrow. Because if we can recognize really who we are, then no matter what turbulence and interactions happen in the world, we can be at ease. But as long as we take up a position, as long as our sense of self is a construct, and that positioning carries its own hopes and fears, we will be at the mercy of the turbulence of events. And none of us can control events. The more Tony Blair goes on his grand finale tour to show people how wonderful he is, the more people think he's a prat. You know, he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't realize that we are not like him. That's the tragedy. All the money, all the resources, all the public relations, all the journalists going with him to create this particular vision, and people are stepping outside of it thinking, Emperor's new clothes. This is nuts. This is just crazy. That's very, very helpful for us because we can recognize we do the same. Whenever we get caught up in a project and we take it as being enormously important, we don't see the other bits. The blinkers go on. Selective attention's in focus. We overprivilege certain aspects of the world. The rest goes back into the shadow, but it doesn't die. It doesn't fall away. It's still there, cooking with a life of its own, and gradually you have the return of the repressed, and what you have constructed will be cast down. And you walk around in Macclesfield, and you see all these beautiful old churches. And you see how empty they are and how they've been sold off, sold to solicitors. And you think of Jesus going into the temple and chasing out the money lenders, chasing out the Pharisees. And now they are installed in the churches. This is what happens. That what we intend for something, what we believe is really, really good, arises due to causes and circumstances, causes and conditions. And these causes and conditions will always be changing. Therefore, we need a touch of irony. We need to be able to not take ourselves too seriously and not take our projects too seriously. And that includes raising children, taking care of the sick, running a Buddhist center, paying your taxes, doing the weekly shop, whatever it would be, do it lightly. In the traditional Buddhist example, you do it in the manner of a dream, like the reflection of the moon on water. It doesn't mean that we don't do it, because that would be to take us to an extreme of ascetic renunciation, which Buddha Shakyamuni, Prince Siddhartha tried, but then realized doesn't work. On the other hand, just to be immersed in ordinary life and take it as very, very real, that doesn't help either. What we want to live is the middle way of being involved in everything, not saying no to life in any way, doing all the various things that have to go on, but very lightly, seeing it as the movement of like a theatre, like a gossamer construction, something which is there and not there at the same time. The fact that it's there allows our participation. The fact that it's not there means that we do it lightly. And that means that we stay in touch with the essential openness of every situation, rather than, if I don't do this, something terrible will happen. Terrible things will always happen. Terrible things are part of our existence. We are not in control about whether terrible things happen or not. If you're a very, very good girl and your mum's got cancer, that won't stop your mum dying of cancer. That's just a fact. And in my clinical work at the moment, I'm seeing quite a few middle-aged patients who, when they were young, unfortunately, suffered the early death of one or both parent. And they believed, before the parent died, when the parent was sick, they believed that they had to be very, very good, and they described tidying their bedrooms and being very, very careful. And then mum dies. And then they feel very, very bad that it was their fault. And the rest of their life is this feeling, it was my fault. If only I had, then that wouldn't have happened. One can understand psychologically why someone would develop this story, but it is, of course, a kind of madness. It's an omnipotent fantasy, as if somehow we know the rules of engagement. We know exactly how the world fits together, and therefore if we do this, then that won't happen. But what we encounter is a world complex beyond our imagining. There are so many threads running through this world, so many strands of people's past karma from previous lives, so many forces of unconscious activity, so many intentions that people never speak, all of which are moving and creating the happenstance of our life, that things just occur, and then we make sense of it after the fact. We don't actually know. Nobody knows the future. So when we try to control situations, this is a sign generally that we are trapped inside a fantasy of there being real entities which can be placed in various situations. For example, I can lift this mug and I can put it back down. So there is an object which can be picked up and put back in the place from which it was taken. So that gives me a sense that I have some degree of control. But of course I don't put it down exactly where it came from. I put it down roughly in that area, because my perception is not so precise that I can see exactly the marks on the wood below it where it came from. And that's the sort of rough accommodation that we have all the time. You go to work and you sit in the same seat, but you may sit on a different part of the seat. So your seat on that seat is different every time you sit on it. You put on your shoes, but you put them on in a slightly different way. You know, everything that we do is unique and precise moment by moment. It is only in terms of abstraction that there is regularity. On the level of actuality, what is here moment by moment, there is nothing stable. And we can experience this very directly. If you just look around the room, you can see that this room is something revealed to you by where you look, and if you move your body as well, as you just sort of look around like this, you can't help but see different things. And as some of us have looked at before, we are looking at the room. We would all agree we're sitting in this room together and we're looking at the room, but each of us is seeing something different. What we see is immediate. This is our experience. The room is an abstract concept. That which endures through time is an abstraction. That which is immediate is always impermanent. And abstractions are also impermanent because you have to say them again and again. You have to say the room, the room, the room. If you just say it once, in terms of its actuality, it's gone. It is the reiteration, the repetition of the abstract concept which organizes the actuality of the precise moments of phenomena. If you don't repeat it, all you will have is the immediacy of experience. That is what samsara is. Samsara is the repetition of the abstractions which organize phenomena into the seeming identity of entities with an inherent self-nature. So some people are sitting on seats, some people are sitting on cushions. The seat you are sitting on, the cushion you are sitting on, doesn't exist. Why don't you fall to the ground then? Clearly you have an experience. You can feel your bottom on the seat. You can feel the back. What do you feel? The back of the seat. Do you? What do you feel? You feel a sensation. What is that sensation? It's a sensation. It's the sensation of my back meeting the back of the seat. That's a concept. That's an interpretation. That's a construal. That's a story you tell yourself because you speak English. If you spoke another language, you say something different. But they'd all be saying the same thing because we all know people are sitting in seats and the seats have a back. This is knowledge. These are abstract concepts organizing the moments of experience which are always evanescent. Because if we think about our backs in relation to the seat, we become aware of the sensation, and then we hear a car going by and we attend to the car and our back's gone. Experience is always elusive, ceaselessly elusive, ungraspable. The only thing you can grasp are concepts, and concepts are empty signifiers. Everything is ungraspable. That doesn't mean there's nothing there at all. It means that the world is not a story about things, but it is exactly the aliveness of participation. And part of that participation is using language and talking about resting on the back of my chair. Recognizing that as I say, I'm resting on the back of my chair, this is a momentary expression of language. An idea is coming up which momentarily organizes experience. That's all. It doesn't define that I have a real back, the chair has a real back. When we use conventional terms, we engage in a language game, a game which has its meaning by juxtaposition and contrasting. It's nice today, isn't it? It's quite warm. Warmer than yesterday. Where's yesterday? But we remember yesterday wasn't as warm as today. That's what we do. We move these things around. And, yes, now I remember. Ooh. That's what words do, isn't it? They take you up and they move you around. Somebody says something, you get sad and you're happy. It is movement. We imagine we are living in this world of things, of entities, that we know who we are, and that can be fixed down, held in place, actually we are participating in this amazing movement, this ceaseless interaction. That's two very different ways of experiencing one's life. Life mediated through concepts, held in terms of entities, will always be one of vulnerability, because entities bang into each other. And when you feel you are this entity, it is happening to me, I need you to take it seriously, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain. But all that is established in, why don't you want to listen to what I'm saying? Don't you care about me? No, I don't care about you. I don't want to be with you. How can you not care about me? People feel very upset about that. If you care about me, you should take me seriously. This is an invitation to endless suffering. Really, it should be, if you care about me, you shouldn't take me too seriously. That's the greatest kindness you could do, is very delicately laugh at me and help me to laugh at myself. Because then I would become lighter and wouldn't be so enmeshed in this thing, whatever it is. And if I'm not so in it, life will move again. But it's really important, can't you see? Well, if you watch EastEnders or Neighbours, you can see that people are constantly banging into walls. These soap operas are fantastic because they show that ego identification and ego investment in limited identities leads to desperation, betrayal, insane hopes, murderous activities. That's what happens because it's all been taken too seriously. People have nailed their colours to the mast and then have no room for maneuver. Buddhism is speaking of a whole different possibility of existence, of being light, of being integrated in space and allowing movement to occur, and recognizing that one's true nature is always at ease, and that dis-ease arises not due to the happenstance of events, of what it is that occurs for you, but dis-ease is grounded in an identification with moving aspects of existence as if they were stable. It is attachment. Attachment means trying to extrapolate, to cut around and remove from context items and to say, this exists through time as it is. I exist through time as I am. I am me. But, of course, we're always changing. And we know we're changing, and yet the ways in which we feel about events are based on the continuity of a sense of, I am this thing called me. So, by releasing that out, by relaxing into the openness, we start to get the direct transmission of Kuntu Zangpo as ourselves. That's the essence of the transmission. It's to transmit the kind of message that E.T. got in the movie about going home. Except for us to go home, we don't have to go anywhere else. We have to come home into ourselves, away from all the strange places that we've been, all the wanderings in samsara, which have never been anywhere other than where we've already been. It's about misconstrual. It's not about something other. It's about not mistaking it, not taking it the wrong way, but taking it as it is. That is to say, allowing the world to be what it is, which is an inconceivable, wonderful, impermanent flow of experience, which never ceases, and in which we participate as energy, as manifestation, but not as concrete entities. Okay, shall we take a little break there? Have maybe 15 minutes, have a quick cup of tea, and then we'll come back. Okay. In the Zen tradition, they talk about the transmission of the lamp, which is the idea that each person has their Buddha nature existing as a potential, like a candle or a butter lamp, which is not yet lit, and that by coming in contact with the tradition, with a teacher who can be helpful, and with the practice, the living flame of awareness, of recognition, of awakening will come in touch with your lamp, and you will start to be illuminated. The darkness of yourself will be removed. In Dzogchen, transmission is in some ways similar. But it's not that something which was not lit is being lit. It's rather that from the very beginning, our own nature has been open and luminous. But we have not recognized the luminosity of our own mind because we have been blinded by that luminosity. We've been dazzled by the luminosity, and then imagining that it's not us, we have stood in relationship to it. So there's a kind of fluctuation of pride and false humility which keeps us outside, waking up to what is always already there. And it's not there as a potential, but is there in its fullest form. So what stops the transmission is the accumulation of beliefs that we have about ourselves. Thinking I am like this, knowing how I am, all these memories, thoughts, and with their energetic component, the intentions and the dynamic way that we stitch our world together, all of this becomes like clunky furniture that fills all the space. And what is being offered is a kind of space, an openness which has no particular content. Our gaze has, for a long, long time, been caught up by things. We don't want bad things and we do want good things. So we can come towards Buddhism looking for another good thing. Buddhism seems to be a good thing. When we hear the stories of the great saints of the past, we think, oh, these are good people. Or you might encounter the Dalai Lama and think, this is a good-hearted person, someone who is kindly and thoughtful and aware of others. I would like some of that. And of course there is a Dharma cake, a Buddhist cake you can get a slice of. You can get a small slice or a very big slice. There's a lot of stuff in Buddhism, but the stuff in Buddhism is not the stuff of Buddhism. The essence of Buddhism is emptiness. Emptiness means that there are no real entities. All things arise due to causes and circumstances, and if these matrices of cause and circumstance shift, what is there will no longer be there. Some years ago, this building was just an industrial little factory part. Then, for causes and circumstances, the company that owned it didn't want it anymore, so it became available. Then, due to the causes and circumstances of Buddhist activities starting up in Macclesfield and various people coming together, the wherewithal to acquire this place came into being, and it has evolved to become as it is. Through time this may change, it may move away from here. While we are in it, it is this particular Buddha center. It requires attention in terms of its administration and cleaning and so on, and it's a regular place people can come to if they want. But it is a construct. It's a construct which is held in place due to the flows of energy coming from various people. If these energy flows cease, this place will cease. This is true of everything. There are no self-existing entities. This is very simple to say, but very difficult to understand. There's the sound. So a vehicle is going by. Something on wheels is going by. What did we hear? We heard a sound. What did we do with the sound? We interpreted the sound. To the sound which came into our ears, we added, oh, that's an engine. It's probably a motorbike. The motorbike out there is co-created with what's in here. Because the motorbike announced itself with sound, we said it's the sound of the motorbike. That is the codependence, the interaction of subject and object that goes on all the time. What we take to be self-existing entities is always a conversation, a dialogue of self and other. We bring ourselves to the feast. We bring our habits, our expectations, our intentions. That then interfaces with the raw vibrancy of existence, and we tell tales. We construe, we put together a particular reading of that situation. So if somebody is trying to meditate and they're not very good at meditating, they might be thinking, God, that noise, I wish it would just be quieter. Then it would be better. Somebody who is maybe more experienced in meditation might be able to integrate the noise into their meditation. So that would depend on what resources they were able to access in that moment. The same phenomena is seen differently by different people. That's pretty much a truism. What's important for us is to examine what is the furniture in our head, what are the organizing principles and tendency of ourselves, and can we see their historical antecedents to see how we have become constructed as ourselves, to recognize that these are simply constructions. We don't need to push them away because they are simply constructions, but we also don't need to strongly identify with them because they are only constructions. Living with the inherent emptiness or openness of what we believe about ourselves, we then participate in the manner of a dream. In this way, we experience that emptiness is always revealing itself as the energy of manifestation. So if you go into a restaurant, according to your sense of yourself, your dietary habits, your mood or tendency on that day, you will choose something to eat. That is both an expression of you, it's coming out of your past, and it also in some way defines you. That's the pulsation of the world. The past brings us into the present, and the present takes us on into the future. What we're doing now creates the movements or the templates of future entries into the moment. So, when we're strongly identified with our habits and tendencies, each gesture we make towards the environment will be a bit off balance. Because we try to center ourselves in things which are essentially off balance. That is to say, our habits. Yeah? So, for example, you might not be very happy about how you are as a person. And you might be feeling that you have to change your life. So that's already a sense of not being quite settled in oneself, not quite trusting one's tendencies, having an aspiration. So you're caught up in a particular reading of who you are, and you want to use that to move towards the world. Now, that's very helpful in some ways. That can help you change your life. You could change how you spend your free time. You could change your relation with your family and so on. You could really think, I want to do things differently. But what's happening there is that certain beliefs, certain habits are forming a pattern, and you're having an internal take or reorientation. So now I want to be different. And you're already a bit off balance in that. And you're meeting other people who are also off balance in terms of their intentions and directions. So what will you do with that? What will you do with that? I was supervising a therapist recently who was talking about a case of somebody who is only eating raw fruit, and this person is training to engage in an activity, a kind of work which is very social. So I was, trying to open up the fact that to be a fruitarian is an act of social aggression. Because every time you go to visit people or do anything socially, you're going to demand to eat something different. You're going to open your little bag and take out your pear and your apple. It's not actually being part of the world with other people. And of course, the therapist gets a bit anxious. Well, can I say this to the patient? Because the patient's just living their life. And it's a good thing to do. They're doing it because they want to have this very pure diet, and they feel that they're working through all their defilements, and they're going to become this really kind of holy person. They want to get rid of all the dross of existence. But in getting rid of that physical dross, they make themselves socially abnormal. This is the sort of off balance that we have. We think what we're doing is very important, and inside that frame of reference, that's a very good thing to do. Have a real detox diet, but it makes you weird. And so you have to accept that now you're weird, and that weirdness will cause trouble for other people. Because if you go home to see your mum on Sunday, you won't be able to eat anything she's cooked. So being true to yourself and fitting in are always in conflict. But in Buddhism we don't have this problem, since we don't have a self to be true to. Wisdom means recognizing there is no inherent self-nature, and compassion means just getting on with it, being in there, being part of it, moving with what's there. Whenever we take up a very strong self-defining position, I don't do this, I can't do that, we exclude ourselves. We place ourselves apart from what's going on. Now, clearly, there are dietary laws in some religions, and dress laws, and some religions, people will fast on Wednesdays and so on. There are all sorts of ways through time people have set up these identities. It's not that these are wrong, but one has to think, these are methods of installing myself as a member of a social group. If you have a kosher kitchen, if you only eat halal meat, this is a way of saying I belong to this social group. It doesn't really indicate anything about the purity of the soul. For Catholics to eat fish on Fridays, this is cultural. It doesn't mean that meat, which was good on Thursday, is suddenly bad on Friday. Clearly, the symbolism of these things creates different stories which are moved across them. From the Buddhist point of view, it's always to see these storylines are empty. The real meaning of existence can't be captured in a story, because our existence is the freshness of the immediacy of being alive with others. That's not a thing. Stories are a poor substitute for aliveness. And many people lose their whole life, spend their whole life just running stories around in their head. I must be a good person. Oh my God, it's Mary's birthday on Tuesday. I must send her a card. And there's thousands of things to do. good-hearted people, kind-hearted people, devotedly doing things, being members of the community. From a Buddhist point of view, we would say that's a noble way to live, but it's living in ignorance, because you don't recognize who you really are or what these things are. These are merely conventions. All the love of your heart has been constrained as it gets titrated out drop by drop through remembering people's birthdays or going to someone's confirmation party or whatever it would be. These are fine things to do, but in themselves, as themselves, they're just little sentences in the big, big story of life. And if we keep getting in one story, and then in another story, and then in another story, there is no big perspective. The meaning of emptiness is that every story you go into is always empty. So to look to stories, to look to events, to give you some supreme experience, some specialness that will complete you, is an absolute illusion. What completes us is emptiness. Recognizing that you are empty, which means you are open, means everything is possible. The more you hold on to something, the less you have freedom of movement. It's very paradoxical. Usually we think we will get more by accumulation. So the totalizing of economic systems are like that. The more money you have, the higher the rate of interest the bank will give you, and so on. And the more you can build up an accumulation of wealth. But money is, of course, abstract. Money is as abstract as the chair you're sitting on. It is a conventional thing. It's guaranteed by the Bank of England. It's just a bit of paper. We agree conventionally to assign value to these bits of paper or to codes that are on your credit card. And on the basis of that, all sorts of transactions occur. But it's really quite an empty illusion. That's why the world economic situation is so labile. It moves so easily. Fall in the Chinese stock market. 80 points went off the FTSE this week. Just like that. Whoop. Because of something happening in China. And the more we'll see that, this endless pulsations, because there's nothing solid in it. And then the value of the pound changes in relation to the dollar and the euro. It's all just conventional categories moving around like a pontoon bridge. This is how our existence is as well. We have these sets of concepts in our head, and they're moving according to circumstances around us. The key thing is there is no way to stabilize it. Don't waste time trying to stabilize things which can't be stabilized. Learn to move with the movement. The question is, from what point of view do you enter into the movement? If you move from a position of fixity, then finding the beat of the movement will be difficult. As I think we've looked in the past, it's like, if you remember in school when you had skipping games, especially if you've got maybe two girls turning the rope and you're going to jump in. Most of the time people get their body a bit in rhythm before they jump, because that's what you have to be. If you're moving, you get into movement. But if you're solid, if you're stuck, it's very difficult to get into the movement. And that's the basic principle in life, isn't it? So if you've suffered from anxiety or depression, you know what it's like to be stuck in a set of thoughts. You can't get out of it. This mood takes you over, and it's hellish. And people might invite you to do things, but you just want to say, leave me alone. I can't cope with anything. And it's exactly in these moments that we need to recognize that what I'm in is always already a movement. Depression, manic states, anxiety, social aversion, social anxiety when we feel we just can't, that is, of course, itself a movement, isn't it? The body starts to shake, the breathing's going a bit funny, the thoughts are racing, or even when the mind goes blank, something's going on. There is a blanking. Thoughts are being sheared off. The more we can observe ourselves, we realize there's always movement going on. Now, if we identify with the movement, we become this limited position. And then our options are limited. But imagine that we are not the content of our mind. Imagine that some new communist Buddha has taken over and he declares that from this day on, minds are no longer private property. We are nationalizing your minds. They belong to the state. They are public property. No one in this country has their own thoughts anymore. All thoughts belong to the Buddha. Imagine how that would be. That's how it is. What you take to be private, your private thought, your little garden that you need to make nice flowers in and take the weeds out of, is public property. This is the open awareness which is indistinguishable from the Buddha's mind. All our private obsessions tighten us. We get knotted inside. We have our worries. But everything that happens to us will be shared with other people. My mum is old and she's not been very well. She had a fall, broke her collarbone. When I talk to other people who have old mothers, it's always the same story. You know, that's what old age is. Or if you have small children, you tell about your small children, and other people say, yeah, of course, that's what. You know, we are human beings. We share everything. Hopes and fears, love stories that go wrong, separations in marriages, successes at work, failures at work. This is everybody's story. We make it terribly private. But what is it that's happened in our life that doesn't happen to other people? This is the illusion of a false individuality, which makes us ashamed of things that, half the population has experienced. How lonely and sad we are in the feeling that we've done wrong things, or that we're a failure, or we're stupid, or unlovable. And yet, most people are feeling these things. And if only we could talk more openly about it, we'd realize, oh, these things happen. Never mind. That's what people say. Never mind. This is the best advice ever. Never mind. Why would you mind it? To mind something is to hold it in mind, to keep it precious as if it was important. But it's already gone. It's so annoying, isn't it, when someone says, oh, well, never mind, you'll get over it. We don't want that. We want to say, no, take it seriously. I don't want to get over it. But it's already gone. That's the fact. It has already gone, whatever it was. Partners dying, partners leaving, children growing up and getting crazy, losing your job, having sicknesses, all of these things, when they've happened, you're now in that world. You're now in that world. And in that world, you work out what is that world. I am now of the age of being the kind of man who has to get up in the middle of the night and have a pee. When I was younger, I didn't have to do that. But now, always, every night, I have to get up and have a pee. That's what happens for men as they get older. Prostate shifts and there's pressure. It's a normal thing to happen. So my life, something as it were quite private about me, is of course shared with men as they get older. These are normal things, aren't they? And so we start to see that, the sharedness, the givenness of our life situation. That we are part and parcel of what's going on. And therefore we can be more friendly towards other people. And we can be not so frightened and ashamed of the small limitations of our existence. Which is all, on a relative level, part of not taking ourselves too seriously. Just, this is the sort of stuff we share. And if we have more solidarity, if we help each other, then it makes it easier. Shame is such a terrible thing because it cuts a little circle around you. It cuts us off from the world. We feel cast down, that we are different. But actually, what are we ashamed of? From the very beginning, everything shares the nature of Kuntuzangpo. In the Dzogchen tradition, they say there is one ground, one basis for all experience, and two paths. One path is to recognize this, that everything arises from the ground, which is called nirvana or awakening. And the second path is not to recognize it. If we don't recognize that everything arises from emptiness or openness, we imagine that it comes from me or it comes from a factory. So we work out particular sites of the production of phenomena. And so things become more individuated, more solid, more invested. And of course with that, more sense of difference. So I now feel you might judge me because I'm feeling like an individual thing. And if you say something unkind to me, I can feel awful. And that awfulness will spread right through me. And I'm sure we all know what that feeling's like. Just want to die, you want to hide. Because there's nowhere else in yourself to go. You've just been filled up with this. Now, that is just a moment of energy. And it's gone. But when you live in it and you think, God, I couldn't face that, I'm never going there again, you close huge doors to experience. Because you think, if I go there, I'll get that experience. I can't bear that. I'm not doing that. So we make choices that make life smaller and smaller. Rather than thinking, God, that was weird shit. Weird. Hey, I felt today as if I was going to pass out. Amazing. Well, let's go down the pub and properly pass out. That we could laugh at ourselves. You could laugh at yourself. It's amazing. Just to laugh. Oh, it's weird. Just stuff. And it's gone. And it's gone. And it's always gone. But what does it mean? What does it mean? Is it going to happen again? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows. Yeah, but if it's going to happen again, then it must be something about me. So something's now wrong with me because this is going to happen. Oh my God. What would I do? I don't know. Oh, no, I don't know either. I better worry. That's a good idea. It's just crazy, isn't it? And you can see how life then becomes very small as you spiral around these kind of 12 stations of your personal crucifixion. Round and round and round. It's very dreadful. So, from a Buddhist point of view, suffering is generated out of a particular kind of attachment or identification. I believe this to be the case. I take this as strongly real, and therefore I am imprisoning myself within it. What is it that I'm imprisoning myself within? The moment is gone. The actual moment of the ghastly thing is gone. I'm imprisoning myself in a narrative, in an abstraction, in a language game. That's all that prisons are. They are sets of representations. Probably everyone in this room has some event in their life that they would find shameful and wouldn't like to stand up and tell us about. Because it would just feel, I don't want people to know that about me. And we should, it may be useful to think, what would happen if people knew? What would happen? Because in not being able to talk about it, there's another set of consequences. I was just reading a review of a French psychoanalyst who's written a book on her experiences in her family, which was it's a Jewish family, and parents had a very difficult experience in the Holocaust, but they never spoke about it at all. So her growing up was this world of silences, of coming towards something and then being pushed. So instead of thinking, I can think about life, it was always, there are these secrets. And of course she then grows up and becomes a psychoanalyst who's endlessly trying to work out what are secrets. And it was only after her parents died, her father died and then her mother died, and she was clearing out her mother's house, that she started to find these boxes with letters and accounts of the past. And now she's gradually piecing together the experience of her parents and her grandparents. Isn't that tragic? And that their fears and shame and anxiety and confusion that they weren't able to work through becomes such a kind of invisible elephant in the room, but it fills all the space. And this woman's life has been spent trying to live in the shadow areas. So whenever we take something as a strong secret, whenever we make something unsayable in ourselves, we become trapped. Of course, it's not that we need to tell everyone, like the ancient mariner. It's rather that we live lightly with our stories, that we recognize these are just stories. The event is gone, and the way I tell the story of what happened will either bind me more into it or help me to get free from it. So, how do I tell stories about myself? Some people tell very self-mocking stories, put themselves down. It can be quite difficult to be with someone when they're doing that. You want to say, oh, sweetie, don't. There's another way to tell that story. And so part of, in the meditation practice that we'll do more in the afternoon, when we're sitting just observing our mind, we're seeing little bits of storylines, with little captions, little chapter headings, little lead-ins, which of course we can fill in all the words of. And the more we see that, we start to see these are the familiar motifs out of which we construct our ordinary sense of self. Again, without pushing it away, can we find a position that's not falling into it? Can we find a middle way, not being absorbed in it, not believing these stories, not rejecting them as ridiculous or out of hand, but thinking, experiencing, oh yeah, stuff. And see, this is arising out of our mind, into our mind. The mind itself is pure from the very beginning, is unborn, is perfect. Our own nature is completely perfect. And this perfection shows itself as many, many different things. An equivalence we could say is we have nature. Nature shows itself in terms of many, many, many different plants. Some of these plants we say are beautiful flowers. Some of these plants we say are terrible weeds. All of them are the fruits of nature. We discriminate for our purposes. Nature itself offers all of these in generosity. In the same way, in our mind, all sorts of thoughts and feelings arise. Can we be open to the gifts of the generosity of our own nature? Can we just experience them for what they are? As soon as we label them, we stop looking. Dandelions are very beautiful. If you have a nice garden, you don't want dandelions in them. So as soon as you see them, you want to remove them. But they're actually very interesting plants. So there's something about, can we allow our gaze to stay openly with whatever it is in our mind? Sometimes the thoughts are stupid. Sometimes they're full of jealousy. Sometimes they're full of fear, self-pity, anxious drivenness, checklist, shopping lists. All sorts of obsessional thoughts can arise. If we can just relax and think, oh, this is public property. It's like the roads. All kind of vehicles can go up and down these roads because they are public roads. In our mind, this is a public space. Stuff is coming. As soon as we say, no, actually it's private. I'm going to ring fence this. Then we become the owners. And ownership carries many burdens. If you buy a house, you have many things to look at. The roof, the foundations, you've got to check the wiring, you've got to look at the plumbing, You got to see what the neighbors are doing on your garden wall. You have now got a territory to protect. It's the same way. When we take a very individualistic view of our mind, we take on the anxiety of ownership rather than the pleasure of participation. That pleasure, of course, when the mind is showing depressed thoughts, confusion, is not an immediately discernible pleasure. It's like eating dark chocolate. It takes a while to appreciate that. You know, kids grow up, they like milk chocolate. Then you suddenly realize, really, really deep chocolate tastes are wonderful. In the same way, depression. What is depression? If you sit in your meditation with these fuzzy states, confused states, sinking states, wonderful, nuanced, subtle. That's the function of the meditation practice that we'll do later. To develop optimal hospitality, to welcome the whole of ourselves as a basis for welcoming the whole of the world. That we are participants in everything and we are the host. As the host, we can be relaxed, at ease, unchanging. As the participant, we are moving in the tumble of interaction. As a participant, your life cannot be stable. All of us long for stability, but we look for it in the wrong place. We look for stability on the level of participation. Work will always be turbulent. Family life will always be turbulent. Relations with friends will be turbulent. Relations with ourselves in our own heads will be turbulent. Peace doesn't arise there. Peace is the quality of the open awareness which illuminates what we take to be inside and what we take to be outside. The non-duality of arising and the spaciousness of the mind have been integrated from the very beginning. So it's not something that we have to do. If mind and appearance were not linked from the very beginning, how would we join them? What kind of glue would we use? You cannot have an experience and not be there. If you're there, who is there? Who is the one who is having the experience? This is the central question that we'll look at in the afternoon. Are there any thoughts or questions about what we've done so far before we break for lunch?
You said the same phenomenon is seen differently by different people.
Mm-hmm.
Surely the same phenomenon is a construction that doesn't really exist.
Exactly. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about the difference really between flow and transmission.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand, it seems to me that transmission implies an object. And I can understand that that term is very helpful in the relationship between teacher and student. But I'm wondering if flow is a very different kind of animal in the sense that it's perhaps related to free-flowing energy where the subject-object binary is dissolved.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully in terms of Dzogchen, it would be exactly that quality of flow that would be transmitted. I mean, I guess say if you were teaching French, if you're teaching it to begin with, you'd be teaching kind of grammar and vocabulary and gradually building into narratives and so on. But at a certain point, as people built up some accumulation, they would start to get the flow of the language. They'd start to hear the rhythms and what's in play around the things which aren't articulated as well as what's announced. And that's the articulation, that's the transmission of the flow, isn't it? That if the teacher can embody that, then at least some of the students will find a way into that. They will find themselves speaking French.
So the object becomes transmitted into the
Yeah. So, usually at first we need to build up some of these kind of points of reference, which are basically a way of allowing ourselves to relax enough to feel that we have a sense of inclusion or belonging. And then through that we start to feel a bit more. Some people can feel very quickly from the beginning, and for other people it takes longer. But the flow of the transmission is the sense that what has been transmitted right from the very beginning has been the same flow of experience as Samantabhadra. So the Buddha's original experience has never ceased flowing. It never ceases in the moment out of this unspeakable ground, but it has never ceased through time. So that there is, on a relative level, there's the validity that each person who teaches it is not leading other people astray, because they are within the flow. Not just that they have the cognitive information from before, but they're of the same stream of awakening as the previous generations. And then the flow, the transmission of flow is for each of us to find ourselves allowing the flow to be the space within which the flow occurs, and to recognize that our subject self and the object world are flowing together, that there are no banks to this river, that space itself is the space within which this flow of subject and object entanglement. Because often we think, I can sit on the bank and look at the flow. I can, if I'm practicing mindfulness, I can be settled in myself and observe these mental phenomena as they occur. So that's a dualistic kind of meditation that helps us to have calmness and clarity. I can see what's going on for me. The light's gone on, the subject is clear and not over-involved in what's occurring. But when we have the non-dual integration of subject and object as flow, then there is no bank. That's the whole thing. We're always looking to have the space somewhere else, a space of perspective. But actually, here we have an iconic space, that is to say, a space in which we are the thing itself. So you're fully yourself, and your awareness is not apart, looking at, but is absolutely within as the shining pellucidity of whatever's there. Things are transparent and radiant. That's what's going on all the time. Everything is just the radiance of our mind. Each person we meet here is the radiance of our own mind, and that's true for each person. Each person is the center of the world. It's not that there is a true center somewhere else, in Mecca or Rome or Mount Kailash, and if only we go to that place, then we'll be able to see things properly. That's in the dualistic vision of sacred and profane. So in Buddhism, generally speaking, Dorji Den, this Vajra seat of the Buddha in Bodh Gaya, is the most sacred place. So people go on pilgrimage there. And that's marked out as different from anything else. But from the point of view of Dzogchen, there is no separation of sacred and profane. Everything has the same ground. It is only on a relative level of concepts that we apply these names. But names are just like rainbows. They're just like children's toys. They don't make anything the case. They are simply the fruits of the imagination, and the imagination is the radiance of the openness of our own being. So, when we go out of here, walking down the street, who is walking down the street? Is the place going to be the same? I have often walked down the street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Very lovely, isn't it? So, what is this street that we walk down? The street of our interpretation is we see the house, we see the car. The pavement will still be there. You won't fall over, but you can recognize, I am saying house. I am saying car. That is to say, I am co-constructing my world all the time. Whatever I see is the dynamic aliveness of interaction of subject and object. It's not that there is a fixed building and I, as a separate subject, am moving towards that building. The very notion of a building is mine. It's not there. What is there is shape and colour. Who says shape and colour? Not the building. Stones don't speak. We say shape and colour. There is nothing about the object that is not given by the subject. Then you start to see how the whole world is just singing. So, key thing is to observe our assumptions and to observe how we fix the world in its familiar places. And if we relax that, you won't go mad, you won't go crazy, you won't walk in front of a car. You will just feel the vibrancy, the luminosity of everything we experience. Okay, shall we take a break there and meet together at 2 o'clock? And we'll do more practice in the afternoon.